welcome to WonderCon at Home. I am Dr. Kristy Miller, and with me is Brian Miller, and we own Hi-Fi Color Design. Hi-Fi is a digital coloring studio. We've been around for a lot of years, but what we're going to do today is take you through our process of how we do things and why we do them the way we do. Hi-Fi has worked in a variety of different mediums, like obviously comics, but also movie posters, storyboarding, toy packaging, you name it. We've probably done it, and we've worked for a variety of people in the industry. Everything from SpongeBob to Star Wars to Marvel to DC to everything in between.
I really think like everything except for Spawn. So Todd,
Yeah.
if you're out there, call me.
So, Brian actually is an artist, traditionally trained artist. He started out with oils and acrylics and went to school, painting, and taught himself how to do digital art on Photoshop in the, let's call them early days. And so after he transitioned over to digital, we started our own studio. And when we started the studio, we had several people working for us, and we didn't want to just call it Brian Miller because there were a lot of people involved. And so we decided to go with the studio idea, and so we've been Hi-Fi ever since. The studio we'll talk more about as we go along, but with this came a process that we needed to make sure that all of our work looked consistent. And so over the years, we've developed a system and eventually wrote a book on how we do what we do. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today. By the way, I am not an artist. My name, again, is Dr. Kristy Miller, and I am an archaeologist. So I really don't have a lot of art background unless it's like very dead art. But Brian, I also am a college professor, and Brian and I have the privilege of working in different countries and things. And so owning Hi-Fi has allowed us to fulfill both of our careers. And I make Brian like draw pottery and make maps and things like that for me. So we go back and forth.
Travel around the world, creating, digging.
All those things.
It's pretty cool.
So what we're going to do today is talk you through the process of digital color. We're going to start out with the flats and what that means and how we do that. We're going to go into rendering. We're going to talk briefly about color holds and end with the super fun stuff, which is the special effects. Again, we know that there are thousands of ways to do things in Photoshop. We do them this way, our way, for a reason, mostly so that we can fix things later, because there are always corrections, and so that we can have a streamlined system so that everybody can work on the projects at once. All right, so what kinds of things, Brian, are we going to look at art-wise today?
Well, we're going to go through our coloring process. And so right now on the screen, we have just a few examples of work that we've done over the years. Just showing you the black and white and the color. So you can see that, sometimes we have amazing black and white artwork, like this example here, but it maybe has over 100 characters on the illustration. And so we have to use color and light and shadow to make everything clear so that the reader of the comic can spot their favorite characters and understand the action that's going on. Every one of those projects starts with black and white artwork. So here's some examples of that from Superman. This was a Justice League of America piece featuring Superman. And once we have the black and white art, then we're going to go to flat color. And we'll show you today a little bit about how we do our flats. And then every project will have rendering and special effects. So that's where we add all the light and the shadow. And then, like Kristy likes to say about the special effects, the sparkly fun stuff.
Right.
And we do have a creative process. So as Kristy mentioned, Hi-Fi is a studio. It's more than just me and more than just Kristy. And so as such, we all have to work together as a team. And so we sort of created this process back at the beginning, the founding of Hi-Fi, as a way to make sure that everyone's sort of working in the same fashion. And it's sequential. So we always start out with the art import and formatting. That could be scanning, that could be artwork that's created digitally, but we have to make sure it's the right size, the right format, and all that. And then, like I said before, the flat color rendering. Color holds is like an optional step. Some comics have them, some don't, but if we're going to do them, we have to do it after the rendering. And then special effects, and of course the very last step is getting it ready for print. We get a lot of questions about the tools that we use. And the tools that professional colorists are using is mostly Adobe Photoshop as far as software goes. And that's because Photoshop is really the only software right now that can do a really, really nice CMYK color separation for print. Now, this is changing a little bit. iPad is coming along, and I mean, it's been around for a long time, and I do like to use it. But from a professional standpoint, some of the apps on iPad are starting to adapt CMYK color profiles now. So some of those applications are a little bit more suitable for pro use than they have been in the past. But for now, I would say Adobe Photoshop is still the industry standard. In addition to that, we like to use some sort of input device, so like a Wacom tablet. Today I'm just using a little tiny Wacom tablet with a stylus, and this is the one I like to use the most. It just makes it fast and easy for me, and it's really portable. I can take it anywhere I want. But if you happen to win the lottery and you want to buy that Jumbotron 27-inch Wacom with the screen and all that, hey, go for it, you know. But that's really what we need, right? Some sort of a computer, a laptop, desktop, Photoshop, and a Wacom tablet. So really easy once we have those things. And for those of you that have seen Photoshop before, you'll notice that I'll be jumping back and forth between two palettes today, the Channels palette and the Layers palette. And I find it's easier if I just up front say why I'm using those two palettes. Anytime you see me in the Channels palette, that's going to be for storage. So I might be putting a copy of the line art in there, a copy of my flats in there, maybe a selection or a texture or just anything that I want to get access to at some point, but it's not part of the final illustration, or it needs to be separate from the final illustration. So always for storage. And then when you see me on the layers, that's going to be my canvas. So that's where I'm going to put the flat color, the render color, the special effects, everything that is part of the final composition will go onto the layers. And so with that, I think we can dive into Photoshop.
Live coloring versus dead coloring. And
see a little bit of coloring in action. So the first thing I want to talk about is our flat color. And so here is an issue of Usagi Yojimbo from IDW Comics by Stan Sakai. And we've got a couple of pages that I've already colored. So here's page 1 and here's page 2. And now I've got page 3 and it's ready for flats. And this is a part that can confuse and confound and frustrate lots of people when they're starting their journey to become a comic book colorist, because they might want to get in with the magic wand and try to click and fill, but we can see this artwork has lots of hash marks and lines and different things that would make that near impossible.
Also, if you look at the very top, there's this is what we call lettered on the boards, meaning that it's an old school term, meaning that the story, the balloons are already in there. Now they're done digitally a lot of times, but this one's still done traditionally. And if you look at the third panel there, that balloon is way open. So if you would click on that and try to fill, you're going to fill the entire, that whole outside area.
All the gutters and all the balloon and
so there's another way, a better way.
Yeah, there's definitely a different way. So the way we do things here at Hi-Fi, and for the people who use Hi-Fi Color for Comics, is we've created a couple of scripts for automating a lot of these processes for us. And so the Hi-Fi Step 1 script is just going to ask me what resolution I want to work at today. And we have most of the popular ones for comics there. So I could say maybe 400 DPI. And click OK. And what it does is it's going to take that line art and make it disappear.
Sort of.
Sort of. Well, if we look over in the channels, it's actually created a line art channel. And so if we look at our layer is completely blank, but we have this line art channel. So I can turn on the visibility icon.
The eyeball.
Looks like a little eyeball for the line art channel. And now I have the best of both worlds because I can see my blank canvas and I can see the line art, but they're no longer intertwined.
Now that's beneficial because if you leave it in a layer, you could accidentally put your pencil tool down and change some of Stan's art. And he may not appreciate that. He may not want your joint efforts here on his comic. So this protects the line art, essentially.
That's right. And so the first thing I like to do with any page is just flood it with color. There's a couple ways you can do that. You could use the paint bucket tool. You can use the edit fill command, or you can use the handy keyboard shortcut, which is Option Delete on Mac. And I believe it's Alt Backspace on Windows. And you
Don't hold us to that.
You could just flood the canvas with any color, and that's because I don't want any white on the page unless I put it there. And there's some reasons having to do with print why that can be important. But as Kristy said, even here we have word balloons that could be, part of the gutters or not part of the gutters. And so we want to choose where the white goes. The next thing I'll do is I'll take the lasso tool and start to break down the individual panels themselves. At this point, I'm not too concerned with the color. I'm just trying to get a breakdown for the panels so that we can then go in and start to create some details.
The idea is that we're separating them, right? And this is just like a comic book, coloring book. It is a comic book. It's just like a coloring book.
It's just like a comic book.
Thanks. When you were a little kid, where, you have to go in with your crayons and separate everything out. Well, that's your job as a flatter, is to go in and separate everything out. And it's easiest to work from the background forward. And so by putting just a generic color in the background, it helps you kind of break things down on a first step basis. And then he'll go through and work from the background forward after he gets that done.
Yeah, and especially I think if you leave white on the canvas, it can be way too easy to forget to break down things like eyes and mouths and other things that might look like they have some white in them. And then you could end up with some things that are pure white and some things that are not. And it can just cause lots of confusion. So I would continue on to break down the individual panels until all of these were broken down. And then at that point, I would start to add the character colors. So one way I could do that would be like to create a color palette in my swatches. So you can see like I have one for Action Comics here that I've made, but maybe I don't have one for this, and I could go to one of the other pages that I've colored and start to sample some of those character colors. So I could start to pull out like some of Usagi's colors.
I thought we were going to do the backgrounds first.
Well, there's no background in this
He
panel.
got feet on the dirt.
Well, I could do that panel. I can do that.
That one looks like a fun one.
Okay. I thought we were going to do one with his face, but we can do that.
We'll do his face.
That'll be fine. Okay, here we go. So we can start to break this one down, like Kristy said, a little bit.
Okay, now we should preface with, this is not Brian's regular job, so don't be too judgmental if he makes a little mistake or he goes a little slower than others. This is not his regular day job.
I'm also going to preface this with, it seems like any time that we're recording these videos, the lasso tool especially starts to act a little weird and goofy.
He wants that to be true, but we're not 100% convinced. It's just the tool.
Okay, so I've made a selection for the ground there.
Now here's one of these super cool tricks.
I'm going to grab the magic wand tool, and if I hold down the option key, the modifier key, it will give me a negative sign next to the icon for the magic wand. And that means I'm using the negative wand. And because I have two colors that are touching here, the green and the blue, I can now just click on the blue and subtract the blue from the green, and then if I want to fill it with my brown color, now it makes a perfect join where those colors were. So if I turn off the line art for a second and we zoom way in, we can see that's a perfect join between the blue and the brown, versus if we had tried to do that by hand. Well, sometimes you'll see people will have something like, say, this, and then when they put their color in, you end up with like the blue and the green and the brown, and again, that can lead to problems later, so you don't want to do that.
Also, we do this for a living, so time is money, and this is a much faster process. Oh, you're going to clean that up, right? That looks really bad.
Oh, yeah. Well, I said I was doing it wrong on purpose.
So again, time is money. So this is a faster way to do this. And flatting is an entire career for people, right? This is what they do. Not Brian, but other people do this for a living. And so the more pages you get done, the more money you could get. So you want to be proficient and
efficient.
Make good. Oh yeah, that
proficient
too.
and efficient.
And efficient, and make good choices. So now, Brian, you can see he went back to the ref, and he is tracing around the areas he wants to color. Now, if you go back to the ref, you'll notice that...
but one of the things we did here, too, is we cut all the way through this black ink
That's
area.
what I was going to say.
Yeah.
You'll notice that there are different colors on Usagi here. There's some bits that are white and some bits that are brown for his sword, and that part doesn't matter. We can go all the way through just to get the blue first. And the other part is that when this is inked in solid like his pants, we don't have to flat the pants. The pants are already black. We're good there. And so they would actually be the green color that's behind when we turn off the line art. Does that make sense? Are you following me? And it doesn't matter. That's fine. As long as there's some color other than white back there, we're good. So you do not have to flat the solid inked areas. because they're already inked.
Yeah, the black ink is going to hide.
It's not going to show.
Yeah, it's going to hide any of those color joins.
And so now he can go back in and get the belt and the sword and the sash and all that stuff, the details.
Exactly, yeah. Once I try to work from the general to the specific, whether it's flatting or rendering, simply because it's the most efficient way to work. You're going to make fewer selections and get things done a little more quickly that way. Oh yeah, that lasso is having fun. All right, so oops.
Oh, hey.
Sneak peek.
I went a little crazy there.
Yeah.
All right, so he's going to do the sword handles. He goes back, he uses the eyedropper. He's going to choose the color he wants. And then he comes back to this one, and then he can fill with that color he just chose. Now, there are a lot of other little techniques and tips on this. For example, as flats, we do not want to repeat colors, especially from characters. So any of the character colors, you do not want those repeated in like the backgrounds. This one doesn't have too many backgrounds, but you would not use the blue of his shirt, for example, on a building or a floor or anything later. You want to make sure that you don't use that blue on some other character, right? It needs to be a different blue. So let's say you're coloring the Flash who's standing next to Robin. Those are two different reds. You don't want the same red on both of them. And we'll explain why when we get going here in just a minute. Exactly. It's going to make your life a lot easier. There's also things like once he now picks and he gets it all set in this one panel, he doesn't have to go back to the ref anymore. He's just going to use this panel now from now on, and he's going to use his eyedropper off this panel to do other panels, 1 and 3 and 5 and all whatever.
Exactly.
Again, we'll make it go faster and be easier.
And we'll get more consistency that way.
And it will be consistent. Also, you may not be able to tell on the video, but the white of the bunny flesh is different than the white of the sash. And neither of them are actually white, right? They're shades of gray. Again, no white on the page unless you specifically want it. For example, like the gutters and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And you do that at the end. All right, so you get an idea of flatting. One other little thing to keep in mind is that as he's going along, again, it's hard to see on the video, but as he's going along, he's trying to stay, we like to call it like driving down the center of the line art. He's staying in the middle of that black line art that's going around. And that gives you a nice edge. You don't want to try to abut it against the line art, remember, because you want it to go underneath. Exactly. And so that's where he's going down the middle of the lines so that it goes out underneath that black line art.
And sorry about the sloppiness today, guys. Like I said, whenever I record the videos, the lasso tool,
sure,
it gets a little herky-jerky.
It's the lasso tool.
I mean, I'm blaming the lasso tool.
All right, so there is flatting. It is kind of zen-like once you get going. You just start, you kind of get into the groove and you start going and going. And this one actually is quite easy, obviously, because there's not that much on the page. But again, go back and think about the one he showed earlier where there's hundreds of characters, and you as the flatter have to know all those hundreds of characters and get all their little knee braces and, left gauntlet and right eyeballs, all the right colors.
Sure.
So it takes a while.
And just because it's cartoonish doesn't mean it's easy either. I mean, look at all these vines that overlap and
right.
things.
And the rocks and different things.
So there's definitely plenty of work to be done there.
All right, so once you get the flat colors done, that flat color actually comes back, and in our world, in our studio, flatting is done by one group of people and the rendering is done by another. So the flats come back to us, and then you are ready to actually start the rendering, which is the fun highlight and shadow portion of it.
Right, so here's a Booster Gold page. This was drawn by Todd Knock for DC Comics. Awesome page. We can see there's our flat colors, and this is one that I've started rendering, but I've got a few areas left to complete. So the backgrounds are done, and I'm working on Booster Gold, but I still have like his face and his hair and some of his gold elements to work on. So this is the next step where we can talk a little bit about how people might work on art if you don't necessarily have like training for comics. So the first thing we might see people do is say, okay, I want to render his face, and they'll be like, I guess I'll use the magic wand tool, and they'll click on the magic wand, and then maybe they'll get their paintbrush, and they'll find some value that they want to paint with, and they'll start painting, and then Photoshop crashes, or the power goes out,
Whoops.
Or something happens, and when they reopen it, they've already got some painting done, and it's really hard to get this selection back, right? So one of the things that we like to do is isolate the area that we're going to work on a little bit more. So once we do the selection with the magic wand, we do the layer via copy, which is Command J on Mac, and the preserve transparency. And I'll show you why that matters, because once it's on its own layer, let me switch to like a crazy green so you can see. If I start painting, it kind of goes everywhere. But if I do the preserve transparency and I start painting, it will only go on the face. And so this
is one of those professional tricks.
Yeah, this is one of these big tricks that you want to know for sure. So it's the layer via copy and preserve transparency. It just puts that area on its own layer so that we can only affect that area. So it works really well that way.
And the idea is that you can still use big, long strokes and paint naturally, but you're not going to have to worry about the blue or the yellow or the gold or whatever. So it's a way to make it look more natural and not have to like stop at the edges of where the colors meet.
So the other thing that we'll see, like, again, people who are aspiring, or maybe they're not professionals yet, or maybe, some of us only got like elementary school and high school art training, and so we only know what we learned there. Or maybe we watch some YouTube tutorials or whatever it is, but we'll see a lot of people come in and they'll go, okay, it's the face. I need to add some highlights to this side, and they'll start painting in some highlights, and then they'll go, oh, I need more highlights, and they'll make a different value, and they start working on that, and then they'll go, oh, now I need some shadow, and they'll come and they'll make a darker value, and they'll start painting in on that, and they'll just keep working from like the mid value towards light and towards dark, and then towards light and towards dark, and they'll keep working and working and working. And if this is your own webcomic, more power to you. Do it however you want. But if we're trying to keep track of Booster Gold here, we have his skin, his hair, his gold, his blue. So we have all those colors to keep track of. And then however many colors it takes to render all that. And if you're working 3 shades of highlights and 3 shades of shadows, that you multiply that times all of his costume colors, times 9 panels a page, times 22 pages of comic, times 12 comics a year, you're going to go insane. So I think we have a little bit more efficient way to do this. So again, we'll do our layer via copy, preserve transparency. This time what we're going to do is we're going to set our brush from normal to screen. And in Photoshop, that just means painting with light. And so what that will allow me to do is just work from this dark value on his face and just add highlights in a way that looks very natural and very realistic or believable, and it's going to be also much faster.
And so the key here is that your flat color is important, because your flat color is essentially your shadow. It's your dark area. Not everything has to be touched, right? So if you want to add highlights or add light, you use your brush on screen, and if you want it to be lighter, you hit it again. If you want it to be lighter, you hit it again. You don't have to change color. So now you need your flat color and you need your screen color. That's it.
Exactly. And with that screen color, every time I put the brush stroke down, just like Kristy said, it's going to get a little bit lighter. So it's a really fast way to generate those highlights and contrast without having to switch values a lot. And that makes a big difference. And the other thing is, people about this time will ask us, how come you don't use Dodge and Burn? Dodge and Burn does the same thing. So the main difference is that Dodge and Burn can create colors that are outside of the printable gamut, that are colors that are either too saturated or too dark to be printed. And so that's why we don't use Dodge and Burn, because pretty much 99% of the comics that we work on are going to be printed. So
or they're both. They're digital
or they're digital and print. So we have to pay really close attention to making sure that everything that we do can be printed nicely.
The other thing oh wait, hold on. That's my favorite part.
Okay, I'll keep making selections.
So another thing that you need to pay attention to is that Brian is using the lasso to control where he wants the brush to go. So he's not just brushing, not just painting, but he's using the lasso to make this selection. And then he's taking the brush and the edge of the brush so that it fades and doesn't just fill it in. If you were just going to fill it in, you would just do it as a flat, right, and put the color in. So it's this tool control of what we call cut and brush. Cut is the lasso cuts, and brush is obviously the brush. And so you have to use that together. The other thing, a little funny thing that I was just saying is my favorite part, is that if you notice on Booster's nose here, Brian just made this fun little, looks like an exclamation point. It goes down the top and then there's a dot at the end, and it looks like an exclamation point. And the beauty of that is that it actually helps show the three-dimensionality of the nose, but it looks like an exclamation point. This is like a hi-fi trick. If you look at any comics from hi-fi, especially covers or something that's up close on faces, you'll see that exclamation point on almost everything. Now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. But when you walk away and come back, it doesn't look like an exclamation point anymore. It looks like it makes the nose more 3D.
Yeah, you get the ridge of the nose and the bulb, the tip of the nose.
And where'd you get that, Brian? He totally stole that.
Like Renaissance painting is where I learned that from.
Like real artwork, huh?
Yeah, imagine that. So if I was happy with the face, I could go ahead and merge that layer down into my render layer. And then maybe I want to mess with the hair next. So magic wand, layer via copy, preserve transparency. And I could look at the hair. So the same way I was using the brush on screen mode, I can also use the gradient tool on screen mode for areas where I want like big swaths of highlights. So maybe I want to do like a rim light on Booster's hair here. So I can grab my gradient tool, tap and drag, and every time I tap and drag again, it'll get brighter and more intense.
And it's set to screen mode, don't forget.
Right, it's on screen mode, so I'm painting with light. And if you've not done it before, it can take a little while to wrap your head around that. But once you get used to this idea of painting with light instead of painting with like opaque value, it really unlocks the power of what can be done with Photoshop, and maybe why you see some coloring in certain comics and you can't figure out like how do they get it to look that way, and you start to play around with screen mode and you're like, I've got it now, I can do it.
Well, and again, it is a time thing as well. You're not keeping track of all those values, you're not redoing stuff, you're not thinking about the darkness, you're thinking about the light. If you're sitting in a room and all the lights are off, it's dark. You turn on the overhead light and you have added light, right? You don't add darkness, you add light. And so that's the whole theory behind this. It just makes visual sense.
Yeah, and again, it's all just kind of based on oil painting techniques. All right, so there's the hair. It's looking pretty good. And maybe we want to do a little bit of his gold, so layer via copy, preserve transparency.
Let's talk about, we don't have time to do the whole thing, but let's talk about the fact that this is supposed to be metallic. So how do I make it look shiny?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. One is we've got this rim lighting established on here. So definitely hitting the gold areas with the strong rim light is a good place to start. But the other one is just the concentration of the light on the character. So, different surfaces react to light differently. So if we're saying that the blue part of his costume is fabric, it's going to reflect a little bit less light than the gold areas of the costume. Whereas the gold areas of the costume may be like super
reflective,
super high contrast, and the concentration of the light can be a little bit stronger on those areas, and that sort of idea is what will give you the overall look of like a metallic or a shine, as compared to that softer sheen of the fabric.
Okay, so that brings up a couple of things. The first one is that you notice that this isn't one and done, right? He is making several cuts. He's going over it and over it again and again. It's not just one time and I'm out. In order for this particular style, he might have to revisit the same area 3 or 4 times. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. You're not going to get this, especially the shiny look, in just one pass, right? The other thing you have to keep in mind is that you need some art skills. We have lots of people that have Photoshop skills, but not necessarily art skills. And then we have a lot of people who have art skills, but not necessarily Photoshop skills.
That's a good point.
And this is where you got to put your brain together and get both those skills, right? Photoshop is a program that can be learned. So you can always improve that, but you still need basic art skills. You have to understand that in this drawing, Todd drew that little line on Booster's shoulder to indicate something. That means something to you. You have to follow that line. Reversely, if you look at his chest, his nice pecs there, you have to understand anatomy so that you know where those muscle groupings go. If you're going to give him a six-pack later, you better know what a six-pack looks like and how it works as far as the underlying anatomy goes. So you have to understand light and shadow, you have to understand form, you have to understand all these art concepts, and then you have to be able to recognize it in the drawing, because you may not have drawn it, right? If it's your own comic, you probably have it in your head already. But if it's not, you have to figure all of that out. So it's putting a lot of different things together and getting used to seeing these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. For sure. All right, so how much do we
You got 3 minutes. What would you like to do next?
Should we look at some color holds on this?
Okay.
Or should we do some more rendering?
Well, you have 3 minutes before we're supposed to move to the next thing. No pressure.
Okay, so let's just look at color holds for just a second then. So I would finish his gold. Obviously, it's still a work in progress there.
I'm sorry. I lied. I have one thing I'd like to point out. If you have this backed up, zoom out, please.
Okay.
I want you to also keep in mind something else that we don't get to talk about much, and that's color theory, right? And so if you notice, there are these nice teal blues behind Booster inside where the kitchen area is. And on the outside, there's these browns, right? And so that is actually a very specific choice, right? Also, we didn't purposefully pick a dark blue or that dark gray metallic color for the kitchen because Booster's blue, right? You want Booster to stand off of the background. So you have to think about all of these color choices long before you even get to the rendering in your flats. Another reason why flats are so important. You have to think about how this is all going to work together and how do you make your character stand out. So there's a whole nother lesson in there on color theory alone.
Yeah, and just the visual storytelling of we're telling a story with color, with light and shadow. It's so important. So if we were done with the rendering here, one of the things I like to do in Booster Gold is color hold the lines inside of his goggles. And so that just means change the black line to a color. So what we've got is we've got our make holds action. I'll run that. And that's going to create just a temporary layer that allows us to modify the line art.
Okay, so holds used to be called knockouts, and all you're doing is changing the line art to a color. That's it. It sounds fancy.
Yeah.
You see this all the time in like different cartoons, animation, manga, all that kind of stuff. They do it in a variety of ways. But we also do it in comics as well to emphasize things. Like here you can see, now it looks like he's behind glass, right? He's actually behind these goggles because you changed that art to a particular color. Now, what color did you go with?
Well, I went with just like a golden brown since he's wearing gold goggles.
But I mean, how did you get that?
Well, in this instance, I just sampled from his costume and just made it darker. So
right. So
that way it stays in the same family of colors that he's already wearing.
Right. And so, like, for example, you wouldn't do this, but let's zoom out for just a second, please. Mm-hmm. And let's look at perhaps something in that kitchen in the background.
All of this food is behind glass.
Okay.
So technically that could be something you could color hold if you wanted to.
All right. Now, see, the beauty of this is that it's just like flatting. And so you know how to flat, you know how to color hold. And so because you've already set this file up correctly, then that's why it works. You can't just do it randomly. You have to set the file up. And through our book, it's just called the make holds action. But you kind of have to pull out the areas that you're going to work on, the line art you're going to work on. And so he is going to take his lasso and trace around the areas that he wants color held. Now you have to be careful because, for example, Booster's giant thigh here is in the way. We don't want the thigh to be held, right? Because it's in front of that glass. So you have to be careful when you're going around those black lines not to get any of that black. Instead, you only want the stuff that's behind him. And it becomes very obvious. Make a mistake there, would you please, and grab a piece of his thigh?
Yeah, I can do that.
And so if you accidentally get
a
piece of Booster's thigh, and when you go to change it,
I can make it more
obvious. I was thinking like some big huge slash.
It's a mistake.
Then, when you zoom out...
And I can do a more obnoxious color, too.
But when you zoom out, you're like, oh, wait, what happened there? That doesn't look right. It's because you accidentally grabbed the wrong piece. So you need to be very careful on what you're doing and think about how it works. But it's very effective. You can use it for clouds and smoke and anything that's moving, that's motion, bicycle wheels, propellers, whatever. You can use it for, again, glasses. You can use it for so many different things. And if you watch cartoons, like, for example, The Simpsons, if you go back and look at them and pay attention, you'll notice that they are always outlined in black. They're yellow people, but they're they're outlined in black, but their backgrounds a lot of time are all color held. If you look at SpongeBob, his spongy self, his spongy head, whatever that is, it's always color held, right? But other parts of SpongeBob are not. So it's very interesting what choices you make, and it's a choice. And some people love it and some people hate it. Some artists are like, do not change my lines ever. And other people are like, yeah, that looks cool. So exactly. It's a preference thing.
So if I was done with my color holds and I was happy with how it all looked, I could just go and do the finish holds. And what that'll do is it just rips the color holds out of the black line. So now if we look at the holds layer without the line art, it's just those areas that we color held, so like his eyes and the glass case there. And if we look at just the line art, now his eyes are missing, and so is the glass case.
That's not creepy at all.
So it's pretty effective technique, and it works really well. And then when we're all done with this image, with the everything, like this was the final one, how it turned out for print. So just so we can see, you spend a little bit more time on it, what it can look like.
Other than 2 minutes. But you will notice too that like the shoulder we were talking about, how it does still have that light and how it looks metallic. So you can see that Brian was on the right track. He just ran out of time. All right.
So we've done our flats. Mm-hmm. We've done our rendering. Mm-hmm. We've done our color holds. Mm-hmm. That means it's time for special effects.
The fun stuff.
Exactly. So here's a really cool Batman pinup by Dexter Soy. And this has everything I like in a Batman comic.
Darkness.
Rain.
Oh.
Lightning. And Batman. That's all you need.
You don't need anything else.
That's right. That's everything you need in a Batman pinup. So it has the key ingredients. And if we look at the artwork, the artwork is amazing. Right, so there's the artwork. We can see it.
I would like to make one little point on this that we don't. Another thing we don't get to talk about very often is the fact that this has got gray in it, right? The artist has added in gray into the backgrounds. This happens a lot now. It used to only be that we got black and white line art. It was only black or it was white. That was it. And these days we're getting a lot more gray in there. And
sometimes flat gray, sometimes like painted with textures, all kinds of more variety in the artwork.
Right, and so you need to be careful as the colorist, right? Because you can't treat gray the same way you treat anything else, because you're adding color to gray now, not just color to white. And so that's one of those things that, especially if you're going to print this, that's going to mess you up if you're not careful. Things like yellows go all weird. They go like greenish if you added too much yellow to a gray. Yeah,
those gray values will mix with the colors, and also they're very transparent. People don't think about that, is that any kind of flat lines underneath the grays will show and all that kind of stuff. So you have to be really careful.
Right, your flatting and grayscale is a whole other deal that you have to practice on.
All right, so this one, it's ready for effects. We've already run the Hi-Fi Step 2 script. So we have our little temporary special effects layer here. And this is where we get to learn something new, which is that the same way the brush and the gradient tool allow us to paint with light, Photoshop also has a screen mode for individual layers. And so the special effects layer is set to screen. And that means anything we put on it, it will pass the light down to the layers beneath of it. So it's a non-destructive way to add special effects to our artwork, so we can always go back and change the rendering if we want, or if they don't like the effects, we can change them. We haven't permanently altered the artwork. And
How can you not like the effects?
We haven't permanently altered the color. So the first thing I want to do this one is add some haze down at the bottom to kind of push some of the foreground elements forward and some of the background elements back. Now, we've seen how great the lasso is acting here, and you guys don't want to watch me spend 20 minutes trying to make a perfect lasso selection. So as I said before, we can use the channels to save a selection. So here's a saved selection in the channel. I'll load that up. There's a load selection button on the channels palette. And then I can just take my gradient, and I think I want maybe a pale yellow or gold, so we might have to experiment with the color a few times here. And I'll just gradient some light up into that selection until we get something kind of intense like that.
Now keep in mind, this doesn't work except for that Brian went through and selected the areas he wants this to affect. So if you notice, the pole he's standing on is in front of what he just did, so he did not select that clearly.
Exactly. So that haze gives us that atmospheric perspective, right? It creates depth between our foreground elements and the background. So, it just kind of pushes everything to do with Batman.
And just turn it off and on real quick. See the difference that makes? Wow, look how, that's dramatic. And it took 3 seconds. If an editor asks, that takes a long time.
It didn't take a long time to make the selection.
Well, okay, that's true.
So the next thing I'm going to do is just add a few glows to some of the lights on the buildings. And so I've made some of the windows like a lighter shade of yellow than others. So I think I could just take and make some of those, have a little bit of a glow to them. So one of the things we can do with Photoshop is modify our selections. So I use the magic wand to pull that selection out of the color. But now I want to make the selection, I want to make it a little bit bigger. So I want to expand the selection. This is set to 18. Maybe we only want to do 12. We'll see.
He's just totally making this up.
And then I also want to feather the selection. So we can do modify, feather. And, ooh, that's a big feather. We don't want that. Let's try 16. And that's going to soften the selection. So now if I take my paintbrush and I start to paint into that selection, and make sure I'm on screen mode, I am, and make sure I'm on my special effects layer, start to paint into those selections, it's going to give this really nice soft glow to those areas, like the lights in those windows are glowing. And so that'll give us another layer of another level of sort of like life and activity in this city. The city will look a little more live because it's got some lights on in the buildings.
And just cooler.
Yeah, and we always want Batman to look cool no matter what. Right? So there's a few lights in the buildings. Oops. That's pretty good.
Or you could just move them all.
I could just do that. I could just destroy them. The other thing I want to light up are these like searchlights in the background. So again, I can use my magic wand to select the area from the flats, and then probably just the same technique. I think we'll just go ahead and expand it again, and we will feather it. But I think this time, instead of kind of brushing into it evenly, maybe we'll use the gradient tool here to get like a fade from the horizon line up, so they kind of fade off into the night sky. I think that could look pretty cool. So something like that. And I noticed like, okay, now my fade blended into this pole that we said is in the foreground. How do I fix that?
Whoops, throw it away.
Yeah, start over. Yeah. So I can use the lasso tool here and just do a quick cleanup on that area. Now the key though is when we're working on a screen layer, we don't want to just delete. We want to fill with Photoshop black, because in screen mode, black is the absence of light, so it's transparent.
And there is such a thing as Photoshop black.
Right, so we're going to hit the D key on our keyboard.
For default.
For default, that defaults the colors back to Photoshop black and Photoshop white. And then I'll just use that fill command, Option Delete, and that's a way I can clean that area up. And I do the same thing if I want to clean up any other areas.
The point here is that don't go pick a black. It won't work.
Yes,
it will not match.
Don't make your own black, and don't just hit delete. Don't punch holes into your special effects there.
It will not work well either.
That'll cause printing issues later.
All right, let's see a before and after again real quick.
Okay, so that's our city lights.
So again, already looking super cool.
Yeah. So I think the next thing we can look at is this lightning, because it's going to be a very similar kind of approach. So again, I'll use the magic wand to select it, and we can maybe we'll expand this a little bit more than we did before. So maybe let's just do like a 22, and then on the feather maybe a 24. Now this time, instead of using the gradient, I think the brush will be the way to go, because then we can control how much intensity over the course of the lightning we want to see. So I'm going to mix up like a teal blue kind of color here, something that I think will hopefully look nice for our lightning. And I'll grab the brush, and I'll just start running the brush through that selection a little bit, and I'm gonna kind of make little hot spots in there so that some of it's brighter than others. And it's lightning. We don't want it to look like totally digital and artificial. We want it to have a little bit of like a life and excitement to it. So maybe something like that.
Cool.
Looks pretty cool.
Can we make it rain?
We can make it rain. Yeah. So the artist has drawn a little bit of rain in there. So we look at just the artwork again. We can see the artist has drawn some rain and some rain splatter or spatter in there, and so we can do both of those things too. So let's go ahead and maybe just go a little bit more teal with this color. And let's grab a rain brush.
We have a rain brush?
Yeah, so when you buy Hi-Fi Color for Comics, you get access to all these cool downloads, including some of our brushes, like the famous rain, snow,
rain,
sand.
snow, or snow, sand.
And
Brian uses it for everything.
We have some rain brushes here too. So we have like rain and rain 2. I think rain 2 would be the way to go today. I want to go to the brush settings palette, and we can see that my raindrop is kind of just vertical, but in the artwork, the rain's at an angle. So I can come in and just adjust the angle.
How cool is that?
In the brush settings until it's approximately what's kind of matching similar.
It's a sideways cloud.
So what's in the drawing. And then with just one stroke, I can start to put some rain in there, stroke number 2. And I'll use the Option key to make the brush a little bit smaller, and then maybe bring a little bit more rain in there. But I think that's looking like plenty of rain. Nice. And then I can go to that famous rain, sand, snow brush, and maybe just start to add a little bit more of this rain spatter on Batman as well. I mean, the artist implied it. We all know it's one of my favorite things
Brian
to do.
Brian has to add this to everything.
So, I mean, why not make it look extra?
I always sing the song Rihanna's Umbrella in my head when he does this.
I'm sure Batman's singing the same song.
He might be. You don't know.
I mean, we don't want to get like a copyright takedown notice or anything. But I'm sure
I won't sing either. That's probably best.
I'm sure Batman's feeling it too. See if there's any few other little places, like maybe the corner of this building, Batman's feet. who knows where. A couple little places.
All right, let's do one more fun thing.
Okay, what do we
Well,
want to do?
we could do two different fun things, but let's do one for sure.
Okay.
So everybody knows, well, everybody doesn't know, but most people know that there's this thing called lens flares, right? Lens flares originally were when you had a original camera, it was an accident. You would move the lens in just the right way and the sun would reflect off something and you get this little sparkle pattern. And we didn't like it. It was an accident. Now we want it on everything. We think it's awesome. And Photoshop has a built-in one, but everybody knows what it looks like and it's super boring and generic and you don't want to use it. You can make your own. So it's super easy to make your own effects as well. Right, Brian?
Sure. So
He can make them.
I'm going to jump to the final so we can see there's the one we were playing with. There's the final. And I've left these layers floating just so we could cycle through them and see how it looked on like the real comic. So there's rain, spatter, lightning, city lights, and haze, right? So as we're happy with those, we can put them down into our special effects layer. And then we can make our own sparkles. So I'm going to make a new layer, set it to screen mode. And where do we want to put this at?
Can we do his teeth?
I guess we can try. I mean, Batman's kind of frowning. I don't know. We'll see.
I think it should be his teeth.
All right, so let's get our regular...
You remember the Orbitz commercial? She goes, ting. That's what we're doing.
Our regular soft airbrush. And I guess we're going to give him a little ting, as Kristy says.
It'll be fine.
Maybe like a blue value might be fun here. Some sort of bright color. Okay, so I'm going to start with just a small airbrush. I'm just doing like a little swirl, build that up 1 or 2 or 3 strokes. Then I'll take my lasso tool and I'll draw like an X. It could be a fat X, it could be a skinny X, depends on how wide or skinny you want your sparkle to be.
It'd be dramatic as you want it to be.
You know, if it was like big floodlights, you might want to go fatter. And again, I can use the bracket key, make the brush really big, and I just kind of paint in like spirals into that X, and then make it smaller and smaller and smaller until it gets almost to white, and then maybe add just a little bit more there to...
How cool is that?
Boom.
If he was showing his teeth, he could totally ting it off of there.
That's right. The lightning, I guess, is reflecting off of Batman's gorgeous smile.
Yes, that seems legit. No?
I mean, or he's infected by nanobots and he's got like a killer eye now or something. That's pretty cool.
So the beauty there is with free transform. If you're not familiar with free transform, get on that one.
That's true. I could make it smaller. I could rotate it.
You can copy it. Give him 2 cyber eyes.
That's right. He's now not Batman. He's Cyber Batman. Whoa.
So now you've done all that cool stuff. And again, you made your own, and you can make it anything you want. The other thing is that you can save these and use them again and again. We color Green Lantern a lot. He has a lot of effects with his ring. So you could make that effect, save it, and then reuse it again and again. Same like gunfire or shooting laser beams out your eyeballs or whatever. You know, you can save these things. Also, if you do get the Hi-Fi book, it has several special effects already built in.
Excellent. So
anything else you want to cover on that one?
I showed the final, so I think that kind of shows how it turns out at the very end.
Very dramatic.
Yeah, it was a fun. I mean, you know, you can't go wrong with Batman. Batman's awesome. But I think we have a final slide. Is that right? Here in our presentation, I do believe. Learn more.
Oh,
what if people want to learn more?
That's a great idea.
What can they do if they're inspired by this and they want to maybe try their hand at coloring, or maybe they're already coloring and they just want to learn some tips and tricks to do it better?
All right. So as we mentioned, shameless plug, Hi-Fi Color for Comics is available on Comixology and Amazon and anywhere else you want to get it. It comes with art. It comes with tutorials, step-by-step guides. It comes with brushes and special effects and just a ton of stuff if you are interested in that. There's also a Facebook group called Hi-Fi Color for Comics. Brian and I don't run it. It's fan-based, but we do post on there or comment. Brian's been doing this fun thing on Fridays called Feedback Fridays, where you can go and post up whatever you're currently working on and have it critiqued by the group, including Brian. Sometimes if you have a question, something won't work, you can post it up there and somebody will answer you, or we will have time to come in and answer you. And finally, Brian and I also have a Patreon where we do...
we have a comic coloring course.
A comic coloring course.
Yeah.
Can't even get it out.
And group classes.
And individual private lessons, and you just get a bunch of stuff. So if you're familiar with Patreon, check that out. And if you're not familiar with Patreon, check that out. Also, Brian is an artist in his own right, other than just just coloring. And so we have something called Octopolis as well. And Brian does Twitch feeds where he draws different Star Wars characters, and he does something called Tiki Tuesday, which is super fun on Tuesday nights that you should check out. But all of that is available online if you are so inclined and interested. So let's see if anybody has any questions about anything before we wrap this up.
Yeah, we'll take just
in the chat, please. If you have any questions, please pop it in there.
Minutes. If you've got questions,
how do you pick your base and screen color? Excellent question.
Oh, that's a great color. Well, let's look at our flatting that we were doing here somewhere. There we go. So we did mention that, like, if it's an established character, you might have some reference that you can choose from to work from. But for us, one of the important things is the amount of ink that's going on the page, because again, it is going to be printed. So if you're familiar with Photoshop, in your info palette, there's a thing called panel options, and you can set your color readout to total ink, and that will tell you the amount of ink saturation approximated in your final print. We in the studio, we try to keep most of our flat colors 200% or less final ink, total ink. Sometimes if there's an area we want really, really dark, we might go as dark as 220%.
But that's it.
But that's a rare occasion. What that does is it makes sure it doesn't print too dark, and it creates contrast between the color and the black ink, because most publishers, most artists want to be able to see their inked lines. So as I mouse over, like his blue, we can see it's 160%, his white is 98%. Et cetera, et cetera. So all of these are beneath 200% ink, which means they're safe flat colors.
You'll also hear people say it's about, what's your K limit? K means black, and so that's what they're talking about. Your ink limit for the black. That's what we're talking about.
So we try to keep our K limit below 30%. Occasionally we'll work with a company that wants like 0K, and that's doable too. But
you got to think about it.
with the modern comics, as long as we're under 30, the color separations tend to be really clean and print really nicely. So
the world is your oyster, so to speak, on what colors you want to use, as long as you stay within that. Also, you'll notice that when you go to your color picker, there are certain colors that come up and they have little exclamation points next to them. Those are illegal on your base colors, on your flat colors. Yeah. You'll see there's a little exclamation point. That means it's not going to print legally. It's outside the parameters of what's capable of print. If you're only for web, doesn't matter, do what you like.
And if you click the little box underneath the exclamation, Photoshop will show you the closest value to how it will really print. And that may be a value you want to use, or it may be wildly different from what you had in your mind, especially if maybe you're on a green or a purple or something.
Right.
Like if you go to a really bright purple, it might go to a crazy blue. It's telling you this purple won't print purple.
It's way not right.
It's going to print blue, and so you have to make adjustments for that. And just the more you do, the more you'll get the instincts for it.
All right, so quickly then, let's pick his blue.
Okay.
Like his base color blue. So now, if we're going to choose our screen tone, it doesn't always work, but one of the quick and easy ways to do this is to think of this square that you're looking at in the color picker as quadrants, right? 4 sections. And so what we're trying to do is keep your screen color within a particular area.
Look what I have right here.
Hey, how cute is that?
So here's our quadrants.
I like that they're stars.
And so you can see that this sort of bottom quadrant is no man's land. You don't want to go there, right? Because all the colors are either really saturated or they're got a lot of K in them. They're really dark. So for our screen colors, we're going up into sort of the top right corner area where everything is bright and saturated. And for our base colors, we're staying in that sort of medium zone, like we were saying before, where everything is below 200 and less than 30% K.
So look at that. So when in doubt, stay with the green star area, head up that angle, green to upper pink, and start there. If you go lower than that, it's going to be what we call milky. And so it's not going to look right, and it's not going to be clean, and it won't print very well.
Yeah, so the less saturation in your screen tones, the faster the rendering will turn white and look very opaque. And so unless you want that, you don't want it to go that way.
All right. Thank you. Excellent question. We have time for one more. Anybody got anything else? You have to wait for them to type. Is there a way to change colors of already rendered parts in the art? Another excellent question.
That's a good question. So here we can show on Booster Gold. So, like we said before, we always have a render layer and we keep a copy of our flats. So even though, say, Booster's blue areas of his costume, even though that's already all rendered, if DC were to come back and say, oh my gosh, this is Booster's evil twin, and it's different colors, well, what we can do is we can go to that flat color, use the magic wand to select the blue.
Make sure your flats are right. You don't want any other blue.
Exactly. And then go back to our rendering, and we can then adjust the color. Now I'm going to bring up hue saturation. Sometimes when recording, that crashes the video. So we
Let's hope it doesn't work.
We will see what happens.
If it does, bye.
I'm going to bring up hue saturation.
Oh, it worked.
And we should be able to adjust the hue slider.
Oh, look, now he's purple.
And change Booster Gold's color while retaining all the rendering that we've already done.
This is why your flats matter. This is why we do the things and the steps that we do. We can fix it later in the corrections.
So let's say that this is the color of his evil twin. And we can click OK. We do not have to do any re-rendering, and that's the saving grace of using this sort of technique.
Now, if the editors ask, this takes a lot of time.
That's right.
Extra pay, maybe a couple of days.
Had to recolor him from scratch, man.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the questions. We hope to see you around on Patreon or Facebook or wherever you might be. And hopefully we'll see you in person someday soon. Thanks, everybody.